In 1955, the death of Emmett Till was just one more reason for Medgar Evers to continue his work as a civil rights activist. He was the NAACP's first field representative in Mississippi. Having grown up in the Jim Crow South, Medgar was a man on a mission.
There were any number of things in his childhood that really made him acutely aware of the injustices. And as a young man who volunteered to go into the army to fight for his country in World War II, and then come home and find that he was still a second-class citizen, not being able to register and vote, he said, this has to change. And he decided that he would be a part of that change.
Evers fought for change in the racially charged climate of Mississippi.
Mississippi was considered the South Africa of America. It was like the most oppressive state, the most anger and fear and hatred and violence. And so his courage in the context of that state took on bigger than life meaning.
Medgar Evers, like so many black people whose families before them were raised in the South, actually loved the South. And they had this tremendous hope that things would change.
But as Medgar worked on the front lines of change, he placed his life in jeopardy.
Just working for civil rights in Mississippi, it was a strike against you. You're a marked person. He knew that.
Medgar and his family lived with death threats. It was a life of barricaded doors and ever-drawn window blinds and safety drills for the children.
He taught them how to fall to the floor with the sound of gunfire and crawl to the bathroom, the bathtub, and always take care of their little brother.
Despite the dangers, in early 1963, Evers began an active campaign to force the issue of racial inequality in Jackson, Mississippi. He organized demonstrations, went head-to-head with the mayor and the city's business leaders.
We were determined under Medgar's leadership to forge ahead, to crack the system. And they were determined to wipe him out because he was a leader.
On May 28, 1963, the NAACP began sit-ins at Woolworth's, where blacks were not served at the lunch counter. That night, someone threw a Molotov cocktail at Evers' home. Damage was minimal, but the message was clear.
The threats, the danger, made life so precious to us. Very seldom did we ever part without saying, I love you, and certainly without embracing each other.
Prophetically, at an NAACP gathering in Jackson on June 7th, Evers told the crowd, I love my children and I love my wife, and I would die and die gladly if that would make a better life for them.
We knew. We held each other tightly a couple of nights before he was killed. And we both cried together. And he said, it's not going to be long. I said to him, I know.
On the night of June 12th, here in what was then the NAACP office, Evers watched with other movement leaders as President John F. Kennedy delivered an impassioned speech on civil rights.
We face, therefore, a moral crisis as a country and a people. We have a right to expect that the Negro community will be responsible, will uphold the law, but they have a right to expect that the law will be fair, that the Constitution will be colorblind.
Medgar was thrilled with the speech and then met with his NAACP colleagues late into the evening. When their meeting was over, he drove home. In a nearby vacant wooded lot, a sniper crouched behind some honeysuckle. Medgar's car turned into his driveway. As Medgar stepped out of his car, he slammed the door shut.
We had made a pact that whichever one of us were driving, we would never get out on the driver's side because the driver's side faced this vacant lot, and we knew that it was a wonderful place for an assassin to hide. That night he was so tired until he got out on the driver's side.
Evers was shot in the back and fell to the ground. Medgar and Murley's worst fears had come true.
I ran to the front door and saw him lying there and screamed. It was only then that the children left that area and came out to join me and asked their father, please get up, Daddy, get up, Daddy.
No longer a father, a husband, an activist, Medgar Evers was now a part of history. Unlike the murders of so many before him, his death was not considered a lynching, but an assassination.
It was a real sign of changes to come, that his body came all the way to Washington and his widow and little children went to the White House, and that he was buried in Arlington Cemetery and accepted as somebody, as a martyr.
He must be looked upon as one who helped liberate and free the state of Mississippi, the South, and the nation. You know, he had many opportunities to leave, to do something else, but he decided to stay. And he paid a heavy price. He gave his life.
Medgar Evers' death served as a rallying cry for the movement. 2 months later, on August 28, 1963, a crowd of 250,000 gathered for a historic march in Washington. It was the largest demonstration for human rights that America had ever seen. Black and white had come together with the hope that equality, liberty, and justice would prevail for everyone. But as for the man accused of killing Medgar Evers, he wasn't even close to coming to justice. The investigation into the June 12, 1963 murder of civil rights activist Medgar Evers soon pointed to Mississippi white supremacist Byron De La Beckwith.
I think Beckwith felt like the NAACP, as he termed it in his own words, was the monster, the enemy, all those things. And so therefore, Medgar Evers was the symbolic head of that in Mississippi.
It wasn't just hatred for an individual human being, but hatred for an entire race of people.
There was a fair amount of incriminating evidence, including the proverbial smoking gun. Beckwith's .30-06 rifle, thrown down in panic, had been found at the scene of the crime. He'd attempted to wipe off his fingerprints, but one print remained. Beckwith was subsequently arrested and charged with murder. In 1964, a trial was held. To no one's surprise, an all-white, all-male jury failed to convict. Beckwith mocked the justice system, saying, "They can't convict me."
When he left Jackson, the highway was lined with people holding signs welcoming him as a hero. That hurt. That made me angry.
Still, Beckwith hadn't been acquitted. He'd gotten a hung jury. Prosecutors tried again, but fared no better. Another hung jury. For the next 2.5 decades, Beckwith was a free man, often spewing his racist ideology to whomever would listen. Then, in 1989, a series of events began that would bring Beckwith back to court. It started when Clarion Ledger investigative reporter Jerry Mitchell got a hold of long, secret documents from a then-defunct Mississippi Sovereignty Commission, a secret state-sponsored group that spied on civil rights activists. Mitchell discovered documents proving that the Sovereignty Commission had interfered with the judicial process prior to De La Beckwith's trial.
I got leaks of Sovereignty Commission records, which were still sealed, and they showed that the commission had in fact helped out Beckwith's defense at the time.
The State Sovereignty Commission was involved in helping Beckwith's lawyers pick the jury. So you had one arm of the state of Mississippi trying their best to get Beckwith convicted, and you have another arm of the state aiding and assisting the accused murderer.
When Medgar Evers' widow learned of this, she was eager to see a new trial held, one in which there was no duplicity during the jury selection process.
It was a thing of staying on top of it, because no one wanted to touch the case. And I said, we've come this far and I can't let go.
In 1989, Medgar Evers convinced Jackson, Mississippi District Attorney Ed Peters to reopen the case. Peters assigned Bobby DeLauder to take the brief.
We began to find things, and by December of 1990, we had as much or more in that 25-year-old murder case than I do in many so-called contemporary homicide cases.
In 1994, Beckwith, in his 70s, was brought to trial for a third time. Perhaps the most important testimony came from 6 people who'd met Beckwith after the murder. Beckwith had bragged to them that it was he who was responsible.
These were people that Beckwith thought would have been impressed at the time the statements were made with what he had done. See, Beckwith wanted to get the credit for murdering Medgar Evers, but he didn't want to have to pay the price for it.
But in 1994, 31 years after the fact, Beckwith could no longer laugh at justice. A jury of 12 men and women that this time included 8 blacks found Byron Taylor Beckwith guilty of the murder of Medgar Evers. He was sentenced to life in prison. Medgar Evers could finally put her 30-year struggle to rest.
All of the ghosts, all of the evil little bits surrounding this case escaped from my body at the time the guilty verdict was read. I became renewed. My children became renewed because finally justice prevailed. It was liberating. The hurt, the pain will always be a part of my life. But there's hope. There's vision for a brighter tomorrow. And it's so good to say, Medgar, you did not die in vain.